we're going to do self-care. We're going to talk about the plans. And it's like, and I sat there and I had this moment where I pulled out and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the queerest thing in the world. And it's my fault. And I do this all the time and I can't help it.
Recorded live from D&D Divinity School, it's the Roll for Joycast, where we quest in order to play our way to a world of holy wholeness.
I'm your host, Trin, your spiritual companion and therapist.
And I'm your host, Rory, your Dungeon Master Pastor.
Today, we talk about world building with Dr. Tamisha A, the Theopoet, and visiting assistant professor of theology and culture and theopoetics and director of MA program at Bethany Theological Seminary in Richmond, Indiana. Welcome.
Yeah. But first, let's roll initiative and meet all the players at the table. So, everybody roll your initiative. Okay. I got a 9.
14.
If I'm counting my extra, I got 13. So I rolled a 9, but I'm going to count that.
All right, you count it. We'll let you. All right, so Trin, you're going to go first, and then Tamisha, and then I'll wrap us up. So here's the backstory question for today. If you were tasked with creating a new world for your D&D game to be set in, Trin, what one defining characteristic would serve as your starting point?
See, I was hoping I would not get to go first this time, because I feel like this is such a loaded question, because I feel like it's hard to pick one, and especially in, current events, impact what world I would build. So for me right now, I think like the main characteristic that I would pick would be equity.
Equity.
Like, just how do we be equitable to each other and notice that not everybody starts in the same place. Not everybody has the same tools or access. I think that's what I'm thinking about every day.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, Dr. Tamisha Tyler, welcome to the Roll for Joycast. What would your one defining characteristic of your new world be?
This is a really hard question because I was going to think of something like all of the food places are going to be awesome, but then she said equity, and now I got to come with the shit.
You can say whatever you want. I know what I'm going to say. I'm not going to be as eloquent or topical.
But I wouldn't completely change my answer, but I would slightly change my answer in something that there has to be a lot of joy in my. So whatever brings the people on the quests that they meet up with in the bars, there has to be a lot of good joy. Even if they're upset and they go into a bar and they're like, "Damn, this beer is good," or "Oh, this there just has to be something that reminds them that joy is very much prominent, because I think in order to have a world like that, you'd have to have things like equity and all these different kind of things for people to experience real joy. So I think that would be it. Joy and fun for me.
So you're going to go with joy. All right.
I like that.
Right. Yeah, well, now it's my turn, I guess. So for me, I've always wanted to run a game in a world where it's on a planet that is locked in a geosynchronous orbit with its star. And what that would do on this particular planet would be half of the world is this burning hellscape that's always facing the sun, always day. Half of the world never sees the sun. This frozen, cold darkness. And then there's this thin habitable zone in the twilight of the planet, just around all the way around like a band. And that there's this, it's sort of a question of there's strong competition for resources here in this line of things, but also potential to find balance in between the things, going from the nighttime side of the planet to the daytime side of the planet. And I don't know. There's just something about that idea that's always stuck with me.
Tell
And
us you're a DM without telling us you're a DM.
I don't want to do
Yeah,
that.
for real. He has like this whole world built.
There's like conflict and all of the things and balance. It's like, okay, we're ready to play in that world like right now. It's great. Like,
Let's go play. Well, I think it'd be cool. I
no,
don't
Oh,
know
it
how
is
cool it
cool.
would be. I don't know if I think it's good for maybe a one shot. I don't know how long I could sustain a campaign in that world. I don't know. It'd be interesting.
I don't
Like,
know.
Uh Maybe I
I
will.
mean, you could, because when you think about like the use of technology that people who are living either on the borders or fully into like the daytime or nighttime world, like the technology that they would have to
Yeah.
create to live and the culture that they would have to create to live,
Uh-huh.
Be
like
interesting.
the harshness of the cult, like how do they treat, like how does it affect how they live in the world, like what kind of challenges that they think, like if they have to take one thing from one side and go all the way to the other side, or like I think it would be a great campaign. Just saying,
Uh-huh.
I think it'd be
Yeah.
bigger than a one shot, personally.
Oh, it'd be cool. I think it'd be cool. Well, I just want to take a break at this point in our podcast to just shout out, follow us wherever you can find us. We're at Roll for Joy on Instagram and Blue Sky. You can check out the website rollforjoy.org, where you can find links to other things, including our retreats. And you can throw a couple bucks our way on Ko-fi. But if you like the podcast, subscribe, rate, review it, and share it with your friends. We love that.
Yeah. Well, today's main topic. So, Tamisha, you're teaching a seminary class on world building later this year, correct? And what inspired you to do this? And why are these skills important for seminary students to learn?
That is a great question. So this was actually sparked during, well, I'll back up. I've always been really interested in world building. I've always, looking back, have been really interested in agency as it related to world building. This is why I loved Give Yourself Goosebumps. You read those back in the kid, and you read it, and it's like depending on the choice you make, go to page. Like those are the kinds of things I love to interact with the world that the author was creating. I'll say that. But the very specific conversation started during the pandemic. A friend of mine, they are a therapist and also getting a PhD in theology. And they actually they convinced me to join an online LARPing community during the pandemic, and that
Okay.
was the thing. It didn't last very long, but I was just really interested in the kinds of worlds that they were creating via LARPing, and it was completely online, completely ran through Discord. But they also are a dungeon master. They're also my current DM for the current campaign that I'm in. And we just had so many different conversations about the kind of worlds they were creating, both in LARPing and in D&D, and the way that they were utilizing D&D specifically in their practice. So how they were engaging it with their clients as ways to engage role play to get them to suss out why they were anxious or why they were dealing with a certain thing. They would create a campaign to help them work through. So shout out to Kiel if you're listening to this, which you probably are because I'll send it to you. Hi.
Yeah. I think, people are going to hear this and they're going to want to look up this person so that they can be a client.
Yeah,
Because that
yeah,
might,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
so
definitely
shout them
going to
out.
see if I can get their info for show notes or something. But yeah, so we just had these really great conversations, and it just reinforced my understanding that our belief systems, the things that we believe, the way that we interact, it all is so intertwined. And so the faith systems that you believe are the cornerstones of the worlds that you create. And the
Mm-hmm.
worlds that you create dictate how you play out in the world, like how you relate to other people, how you relate to self, how you relate to the divine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, one of the things that I definitely always want to teach my students is that their theologies, their belief systems, land somewhere. There are implications to what they believe. And sometimes it's hard for people to trace because it's like you have this belief system or these 10 commandments or Sermon on the Mount or whatever it is, and you say, these are the things that I believe. But then when you're asked, like, how does that affect your voting? How does that affect how you show up for your neighbor? How does that affect how you? And on one end, sometimes it connects and sometimes it doesn't. The act of play introduces people into a world where they can begin to see things play out, pun intended, in a way that feels I don't want to say disarming, but because it's an experimental space, it leaves them open more to seeing what's possible rather than me going, well, did you know that your belief system means this? They get to discover it. They get to have the epiphany, which I think is what education does.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
There's so many questions I want to ask you because you've just named so many things that have lit me up about all of it. But I just love that connection to that your belief system, the language that you hold to, that you use to define, your identity, your values, how you talk about God, that all of that is in essence like that's building a kind of world that
that's exactly
you
right.
then, operate in, that you occupy. And we think, as humans, we're creatures that make meaning using language and using culture, and
Mhm.
that our religion and our faith is part of that, is a bedrock part of that then creates, the kind of world that we inhabit, and then the kind of world that we start to shape through our actions.
Yeah.
So as we talked earlier, it's, these things like lifting up joy or lifting up equity in the world. How do you think that, is that sort of what you're hoping to have students sort of be able to name, or what are you, how are you hoping to are you hoping that they might get some focus on what it is, what kind of language they're going to hold to? Is that the point, or is it something else?
I think that could be part of it. I think the point is the point in all of my classes, and I tell my students this all the time. Um, this is not a class that's going to tell you what to believe.
Mm.
This is a class that's going to help you to understand why you believe what you believe and where that trajectory of belief comes from, right? Why do you believe?
Mm.
Why are you Christian? Why do you believe these things, firstly?
Yeah.
And then secondly, it's going to require you to take responsibility for the implications of that belief. So if you're saying that you are Christian and this is the kind of Christian you are, then you have to deal with the histories, right? The tragedies, all of the things that Christianity brings. And it's not saying that in a way that is an indictment, but it is saying that you're like going back to the sense of like it lands somewhere, and it usually lands in the lives of people who are more marginalized than you.
Yep.
And I'm not saying when you leave this class you're going to believe differently, but you're going to understand where your theology lands. And if that means that you then believe differently, that is your decision. If you say, I still believe this and this is why, now you have a better understanding of the why. Now you have a better understanding of what happens after that. And so I think that is the biggest thing that I want students to learn, because I'm trying to, through world building, restore agency back to people. And I
Mm.
think a lot of time, if we're not careful, we use religion to strip agency from people. And I think that it's a way that we can restore them back their agency. Now, if they go and decide that they want to do all these things that I don't think is great, I hope not, because I hope I also have planted seeds of equity and joy and all these different things. But they at least have to take responsibility for that.
Would you say that like there's this connection of they understand the why, they understand their impact? Because like I was talking with a friend about the worlds we build and the worlds that we interact with in D&D, and just this like unconscious reality that no matter what kind of character you create, you always end up taking yourself into the game to some degree, right? And so what you're explaining is, number one, awesome and genius about understanding how your beliefs shape your reality, your interactions with people. But like people don't always see that. They don't always see like the impact of probably, well, if I proclaim that I'm from this group of people, then there's a whole history that can come along with that also has implications. And so a lot of times people just don't, I just feel like people don't want to acknowledge that or see that, or maybe they don't know.
And maybe they don't know how. Like
Yeah.
going back to my conversations I used to have with Kiel, like one of the things that we were talking about is how through their study of like going back to LARPing, different LARPing communities, they were bringing so many elements of social hierarchy, so race, class, gender, into the world that they were creating together, but saying that those things don't matter in their world. But it was like they weren't using the language that they were used to in our world, but they still had layers of hierarchy that they didn't realize was connected directly to implications of race, class, and gender. So, like, one of the things I also tell, I have certain things that I always tell my students, but one of the things I also tell them is that their imaginations are always tethered to their own context. So I got this from a sculptor friend, Chris Ladoff. He does this presentation because he does religious sculpture, and he talks about how he watched all of the biblical historical things, and he's like, that's exactly how it looked. And I'm like, bro, first of all the people was white, so I don't know if that's exactly how it looked, but I get what you're trying to say. And then, he'd watch it decades later, and the first thing he sees is, oh my God, that's so 70s. Oh my God, that's so 60s. Because even as we're trying to create worlds, we're still tethered to the imaginations of our own context. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is if you ignore it and then pretend that it doesn't have any influence over you. And I think a lot of the ways people, especially when we talk about faith, we talk about it as this like, cloud that cannot be touched by our context or by our culture or by our things. This is God up here. And then we do all the things down here, as if we don't, for many Christians, follow a religion that is literally about incarnation, that is literally about the divine coming in, tethering themselves to our context. So do you see how people are like, oh, I didn't think about it like that? That's the connection I'm trying to get people to make.
Yeah, I think well, just that idea of embodiment and the incarnation and the connection there. And I think one of the things that's hard, I think, for people to grasp sometimes about their faith, and particularly this has been hard for particularly like Christians from Europe, and from whiteness that have thought that like, oh, there's like one sort of ideal way of being, and that's it, and it was embodied in this way, and it's shown up through this church and in this culture, and that's all like ordained. It's all supposed to be that way. And it's been one of the things that I've been deconstructing and working on, like kind of picking apart and challenging, is that idea that God is embodied in just one way, and that when God takes on a body, that there are lots of different ways, a diverse multitude of ways that shows up, and that God can be faithfully, represented and embodied in all sorts of cultures and all sorts of different pathways. And it's not just about my world, but about, this shared thing that we all get to play a part in.
Well, and I find it really interesting when we're talking about embodiment and Christianity and our context. And I see this not coming from a different faith tradition, seeing that like the Christian experience and the creation of Christianity is not even based in itself. It's based in another culture. And so like this tension between recognizing the embodiment of Christianity coming from Judaism and Jewish practices, and then, branching off and creating this other community from a Jewish rabbi that came to live the Torah, Yeshua. So it's very interesting that we're having this conversation about like our context and how we lose sight of that and our beliefs. There's also that tension of like sometimes in Christianity, the loss of their own context and heritage connected to even another faith tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's the sense of what we have seen happen within the history of Christianity is that the context, history, language, life of both Jesus and Judaism is erased based on this divine encounter, this divine interpretation, and it negates, it's like the divine but. It negates everything that happened before it. And I think that practice, that divine but, is a practice that we have kept throughout the history of Christianity.
Yes.
Right? And so it creates a certain way of seeing the world, a certain way of being in the world, right? That divine but gives you leverage to then erase the things that are not worth it to you for the sake of purifying or discovering this one piece. And I think that that is a practice that once you put it into context, now we have just created a whole narrative, right? One narrative arc of the history of Christianity that exposes that. There are so many other narrative arcs that work to keep that intact, right? To justify one particular culture's power and divine connection over another. So, in that way, we have created, right, this language that could potentially tie into a world that helps us to understand, right, the multifaceted ways that of worlds and language and histories that we have created, that we have inherited.
Yeah.
So I think that that's definitely a part of the world building piece.
So I wonder about, as we're talking about this, like it's clear, like this power of world building and kind of using that language, it's incredible power, and it's often been used not for great purposes, and we see it continued to be used even today in through the arms of propaganda, through this tension in our country where it feels like we're living in entirely separate worlds than people on the other side of the political aisle. That there is like an intentional attempt today to build a world that is not one that uplifts things like equity, not one that uplifts things like diversity. And I wonder if in your class there might be ways that you're not just teaching people to build worlds, but also teaching people to tear worlds apart.
That is a great question.
Yeah.
Um, so D&D, this class is coming up in August. It's the first time I'm using D&D as a world building game. This is not the first time I've used a world building game in class. So the first time we did a world building game, a collaborative world building game, was it in my Butler class, my Octavia Butler class? I'm a Butler scholar, so I teach a class on the work of Octavia Butler, who's just an incredible world builder.
I'm so jealous of all of your students.
Well, you too can take a class and also audit if you're so inclined. But the most games that I think I've played have been in my Afrofuturism class. And one of the games that we played, the last game we played actually, was chosen by the class, and it's called A Quiet Year. I don't know if you guys have played this game.
I haven't played it, but I'm aware of it. But talk about it for the listeners.
It's a great game where,
and also you're gonna have to talk about what Afrofuturism is for those listeners that aren't aware.
Hi, listeners who don't know what Afrofuturism is. I can speak. So Afrofuturism can mean has a lot of different inroads into the world and the world building of Afrofuturism. One pretty accessible definition is that it tracks the ways in which Black people in the diaspora, specifically African Americans, are thinking about how they show up in their own futures by way of certain technologies, art forms, language, culture, music, those kinds of things. It traces a history of the act of speculation, particularly in things like science fiction, that writes in African Americans, and by doing so confronts elements of race, class, and gender, sexuality, all of the different things, either by just showing up, which saying something like Black people are in the future can be seen as a political statement because of our current context, and also as a way to seek out and practice joys in creating other worlds in ways in which racial hierarchies are not used as oppressive systems or are not used at all. And it also is a way of just honoring and loving the life and the culture of Blackness. So, broad
Thank you for that.
terms. There's a lot more stuff you can read. There's so many books. There's a great, there's a really accessible documentary on PBS, I think. Oh, no, not PBS, through the Smithsonian, that talks about Afrofuturism and introduces you to history and artists, that I think is great. In the class, Afrofuturism and Theology, we asked the question, like, what are the theological themes that show up in the context of Afrofuturism? And so one of the things that we do is we play games. We do a world building game. The last one, the Quiet Year one, again, was chosen by my students, and it's a dystopian game where there's this community that was recently attacked, and they have 1 year until the Frost Shepherds come, and they're attacked again. And so it's really about what does it mean to like build community in this year? Like, what do you do in this year? And you go through the 52, you go week by week. That's probably the one of the closest in terms of like a world that has fallen apart. And as you're trying to think about, sometimes it is breaking that world apart a little more to get rid of some of the things so that you can rebuild. The other game, Afro-Rhythms for the Future, is an Afrofuturist game where you create a world together that is on a point of tension, and then you together create an artifact to make that world better. And sometimes it is dismantling that is a part of that building. But I'm really curious about your question about what does it mean to destroy a world. It takes me back to your answer of the world, like what kind of point would you have in your campaign? I'm wondering what that campaign would look like if their task was to destroy that world.
Interesting.
That would be
Yeah.
a fun campaign.
Yeah. I want to. So that there was another game you mentioned in there. Aphorisms for the. Say that again. Aphorisms for the future.
Afro-Rhythms for the future.
Afro-Rhythms for the future.
It
Okay.
is a community-based game. I think you can only get it online. I found it at a Afrofuturist exhibit at a museum in in Oakland, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool!" And then my friend bought it for me, and I was like, "Does that mean you're gonna play with me?" And she's like, "No, that's why I bought it."
Oh, come on! No, I'll play with you. Let's get it out. Let's play right now.
I put it in my class so that I
There
have
you go.
people
You
to
made your
play.
students play.
That's really all my classes are. There's things I wanted to do, so I want to play
That's it.
D&D, so I just make a class out of it. But yeah, it is a wonderful game that is meant to be done in community, and it can even be done in large groups. And it really has. It's a lot of fun. You have different words that are connected to aspects of Afrofuturism, which you collectively define, and you collectively create the world, and then you collectively. It's just a very involved collective world building game. Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, there's another game coming out that's kind of in the same line of games like The Quiet Year. It's called Keep the Faith, that Central Michigan University Press is putting out. It's not released yet, but they just had a Kickstarter for it, and that I backed. But it's about religion and transition and how the religion changes throughout the course of the game. I'm super excited about it. But
I am too. I would love to play that game for my class. I think that's great.
yeah. We'll have to just have a gaming group here.
Yes.
No, I am so down.
Play all the
We'll do it.
games.
We'll do it.
We actually have a world building group. Me and my friend Kiel and one of our other friends who's a writer, where we meet randomly and talk about some of the apps, some of the software, how we're creating games, creating worlds, that kind of thing. So totally down.
That's cool. But yeah, I think because so much of our walk through life, we can walk through our lives and just like leave all of this kind of stuff unexamined. Like we just go throughout our day. We don't, not always thinking about, oh, I'm using this kind of language. I'm talking about myself using these kind of words. You're not actively thinking that I'm building this world around me. It's kind of like we're fish swimming in the ocean. We can't see the ocean or understand the ocean because we're in it. We don't understand that we're in this world that's full of water. And it's hard to like get pulled out of that water and look around at it. And that seems a little bit like what you're trying to do with this class is give people a tool that helps pull them out of the water and look around a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a way to, okay, I'm going to use a couple of one Old Testament passage. Don't ask me where the addresses are exactly. I'm just going to tell you, remember that part? Because that's how I remember.
There we go.
So remember the part where David goes, oh no, not David. Nathan goes to David and he's like, man, I got to tell him that he was like dead wrong, but how am I going to do that? And he's like, oh, and he tells him this, he like pulls him in like with his story, and he gets all like upset. Like he's instantly pulled into this world, and now he has all of these ethics and morals and ways that he wants to point a finger, not realizing that it's his water, right? He is the fish, right? You are the man. So we talk a lot about that as a way that story, but also world helps you to snap out of, it allows you to be porous enough to see the water that you're in. Because you're seeing it on in another space, in another time, right? Not realizing that you're seeing an interactive reflection. I think too, the other passage that we refer to, it's not so much a passage, but it's more of a telos, right? So we do a lot of work with eschatology, and eschatology is a phrase that talks about the study of the last things. How is this narrative within Christian theology going to end? And we talk a lot about different trajectories. So we talk a lot about the evangelical-ish trajectory of the rapture, of what happens when, okay, if you believe in this notion that this story is going to end with a rapture and you're going to be taken up and you're not going to inherit this earth, you're going to treat this land a certain way because you're not going to be here. Everything for you is a confirmation that you need to get ready to go. But if you believe a trajectory that says, hey, this is the gift that we inherit. This is the earth that we inherit. We're not going anywhere. This is the thing that we are called to participate in its transformation. You are going to treat that very differently. And so the telos, the end of your story, shapes the way in which you interact in the story now. And so, like, using those broader theological ideals, whether they believe in them personally or not, helps them to go, oh, wait, what do I think the end of the story is? How does that shape? Oh, it is all connected. So, and then they play the game, knowing that, and then they start creating worlds with a different kind of agency. And then when we do reflection, part of that reflection is us coming down from the moment going, what can you take away into your own life? You can't discover everything in one play, which is why you got to keep playing. So I just encourage them for them to both see world building broadly, like ideologically, but also how the practice of play keeps them in line to ask and answer these questions over time. So my goal is to get them to keep playing and keep seeing the significance of what happens when they play. So that's why we tie it into, how do you go and play with your communities after this class?
Yeah.
Right.
And play in a way that's not just, like you said, it's not a kind of play that just repeats what has been, but it's this like productive, imaginative play that plays with the possibilities of what could be.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Tamisha, you just hit on so many things that are just because me coming from that end, what you like, your eschatology, it definitely is present because I come from a different faith tradition that we are about how we live and bring light here to this world. And so like a lot of my cultural context and faith context is around, we're not blasting out of here. We have a responsibility in this world, and we have a responsibility in how we interact with others. So it's really about being present here in the world, and how does our community actually meant to bring light to this world and care for this world. So it's definitely a different eschatology than I have seen in other faith traditions that are just like, we out of here at the end of all things. And I can see how that carries out in their worlds. Also, you're talking about how like all of these worlds is a way to examine all of that. And I kept thinking like, this is why therapy and this type of role play works so well together. Yes. Because we are trying to pull out of the water, see something, but therapy is doing the same thing, but in real time. We're trying to get people to be more self-reflective as they're living life and seeing where things are coming from and where they're rooted from and patterns, whether that's in their family or faith traditions or culture, and how is that impacting themselves and other people, and how is that impacting their mental health. And so like you can see how therapy and gameplay, especially D&D, which is on the rise in a lot of therapy practices, and I hope to have that involved in my practice, is engaging in this constant state of like being present in a different way in your life, that you can practice it in the game, and then as you go out in your regular life, you keep that same self-reflective practice. It becomes easier to see the water that you're in without needing this like massive pullout, right? It becomes easier to see it as it's happening. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I
That's
think
like,
that's exactly right on both fronts, and both of y'all are saying. And this is why the collaborative part is so important. This is why the communal part is so important. When you're playing something like D&D, you're not just creating a world alone.
right.
You are creating a world, and this is why I think it's so interesting how there aren't more conversations between religious practice and D&D, because you're basically coming into a community where you're doing collective world building led by a person that has this certain insight to help you navigate the rules, but you're also stepping into a whole world that people from all over are also participating into. If that's not a liturgy, as a liturgist, I don't know what is.
It's the work of the people.
And this is the kind of aspect of like, it's one thing to get pulled out of the water and to have this experience that you cannot name, right? And I think that that's also a really important part to so many different religious histories and trajectories and spiritual journeys. And there's always this sense of meaning making that happens in community.
Yeah.
There's always this sense of being even returned to community. I'm a Christian theologian, although I dabble in all kinds of things. But like, just to use like the history of the Christian tradition again, like when Jesus healed, there was this return to community. When someone had this crazy interaction or miracle or something, they was always sent back to community. They always had to interpret it in community. There's always this collaborative nature that is constantly happening. We don't create worlds by ourselves. We don't live in worlds by ourselves. And so this practice, even if it's just with a therapist, right? That therapist in their own way becomes your DM, because they have certain insights to certain practices and things that they're guiding you through without telling you, oh, this monster you're about to encounter has this many points, and so you have to roll this to be able to defeat this. They don't tell you that part. A good DM doesn't tell you that. Right.
No.
They incorporate it into the, you roll that 2, which I've done, right? You roll that nat 1. And you get this story about, how the arrow, bounced off and then popped you in the face because you didn't right? You get it in the story without being told, oh, you didn't really get it, right? And I think that is part of it. Like, if we had more, I don't currently attend a church, but if we have more pastors that shared the story of the impact of our actions, like DMs, when we did a role, I think a lot more people would be intrigued to listen to their sermons.
Well, join my conspiracy. We are. So I am there. That is like my whole mission is to marry these two worlds that have split apart, is the world of faith and the world of role playing games, because that there is so much overlap, there is so much connection and life in that, and just like that acknowledgement that there is an active role for us all to play and that we can participate in it, and there's permission in that. And I think, as a pastor, one of the things that I find is there's a lot of people that feel almost hesitant or scared to acknowledge their own power, scared to participate deeply in community because they're afraid of it being vulnerable. They're like, what's going to be asked of me? I don't know if I don't know if I want to say hello to this group of people, because what might be required of me. And that, faith communities have not always been great at holding that in trust, and have taken advantage of people. And so I think, as a faith leader and as a pastor myself, that's one of the things that I am aware of, is like, as people come, there's a need that I want them to feel safe, come on, participate, but that's also work in how I build the world and build the space and set the table before somebody to invite them to that trust is built, slowly and through practice and through doing little things together so that we can do the big things.
That's so true, because I just put a new D&D group together, and there was this like really big need as where I'm like forming this community and there's some people that know each other and some people that don't, but what came forward was this need for safety and the type of play that we do together and how we come together and play, and is that compatible, and what are the kind of like what's the purpose of our gaming, and is that aligned? Because and so it's just this really interesting thing when I'm trying to put these group of people together that don't all know each other, but they all know me. And I'm like, yeah, those things are important, because it was more about like, it was this weird tension of, I really desire this community to turn into something in real life that we like play together, do life together. But also I'm afraid, because this is something new and we're building a new world. We're entering a new world together. So it's just this really interesting interplay in trying to like pull a community together to play a game.
I think this is really interesting, and I was gonna initially push back, but I'm like, I don't think pushback is the right thing that I'm trying to do. I always come to the concept of safety in a very complicated way, mostly because a lot of times, especially in spaces where I'm facilitating, safety is used as a form of passivity and protection, particularly for people who have privilege in the room. They want to feel safe. And so it limits other people who need to express rightful frustration, fear, anger, right? But they're not allowed to express that because other people will feel unsafe if they do. So they have to hold on to their unsafety for the sake of someone else's safety. And so we always call out power dynamics. But I think what's interesting about what y'all were saying that I think is good is the way that you're describing it. It's that the safety is in the play, but the game is dangerous. They're going, and the way that they show up, whether you're using it for therapy, whether you're using it for some kind of a formation, is they are, for lack of a really D&D term, kind of forged in the fire. They're having to deal with a situation in a place of danger, right? Capsulated within play. And they have to then discover who they are through their character and what they can and can't do. So going back to like tying both the community gathering that you're doing, Trin, and like the world of like what you're trying to create within your congregational context, Rory, is like play is where the safety is. But in that, people get to practice being brave. They get to practice pushing their limits of like who they are becoming. And that requires tension. That requires uncomfortability. So a lot of the times it's a sense of, where is the safety, right? Is it safety in I feel okay? Or is the safety in if I know if I step over something, if I step over a line, if I do something that's not okay, there's a community that will hold me accountable and walk me through it. Or there's a community that will call me out, and if the worst happens, I do something wrong and I'm called out, I know it's coming from people who have established some kind of a foundation of care with me. Like the safety isn't in the action, it's in the atmosphere that y'all are creating. And I think that practice really helps us to situate how we think about both safety and people stepping into who they're becoming in a new way.
Yeah, and I think in this context, the safety question that's being brought up is being brought up by queer lives that want to engage in the game and want to feel like they can bring their whole selves without having to always restrict for someone else's comfortability.
Yes. And that's what play does. You have to bring your whole self, and you have to both bring and receive the fullness, both of you and the people that you're in community with. That's what the safety is.
And you can't help but bring your whole self in that moment of play. Like that whole like you just show up and it happens whether you wanted to or not. And you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
I had this moment of that exact thing when I was playing in my last campaign with some friends, and we were standing outside of a wizard tower like trying to get in and save the world, right?
Mm.
And as we're like preparing to go into this very dangerous place, and I'm engaging with another player, and we just like stop and start doing self-care before we rush in. I'm serious. Self-care. So I'm like this androgynous, non-binary character, which I'm very much bringing myself to that. And I just start braiding my hair because I am a paladin and I am just gonna save the world. And then my friend is like, ooh, I'm gonna massage your face and we're gonna do self-care. We're gonna talk about the plans. And it's like, and I sat there and I had this moment where I pulled out and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the queerest thing in the world. And it's my fault. And I do this all the time and I can't help it.
And everybody was like, okay.
And they're like, okay. And
I'll go there with you.
It was just cool how people like met me in this like moment where I'm just being myself. Like it was a character, but it was really me. Like,
Yeah.
I
right?
remember we were playing a campaign. Renya is a high elf and a rogue and bounty hunter and has all these layers. And it's just really funny how like I'm like, oh, am I like this? Do I have to like, it just was this reflection of like how I feel like I have to present, but then this ridiculous, serious softness that also is like immediately behind, because anytime Renya sees an animal, like a fluffy bunny or whatever, it could be trying to kill her. But also she's just like, oh my God, you're so cute. Like I just love, and it's this dynamic of like both humor and fun, but also this sense of she really just wants to be a love bunny, but the world around her has shaped her to always be vigilant. And she's always facing this tension. And I'm like, did I just break through my own, like, right? Like, it's just this, like, notion. And it helps when your DM is also a therapist. So, yeah, it's just really great. I love it.
Oh, man.
I hate space.
Tamisha, you just crashed in and was like, oh, that analogy was like, oh my gosh, maybe that's why I play this tough paladin, but in a queer way that always wrestles with what's expected of them, but then also wanting to be themselves. And those things might not always mix. Oh,
well, friends,
I tell you.
that's it for episode 3 of the Roll for Joycast. Trin, do you want to share where people can find you online?
Yeah, people can find me online at seekhealgrow.com. I'm a spiritual guide, so I have a lot of spiritual conversations with people from many different faiths and about discernment of their journey. I do coaching as well, and I also work with people with religious trauma, and that means from maybe an institution or a church or something that they've experienced trauma from, and I do some brain spotting to help people heal. So my whole deal is I want to see people heal, and there's a connection between what happens in therapy and our faith journeys. And I love D&D, so there it is.
And Tamisha, where can people find out about you online and find out more about this class on world building?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's TamishaTyler.com. If you want to find out about the class on world building, you want to look up where I teach, which is Bethany Theological Seminary in Richmond, Indiana. You can reach out to them and sign up as an auditor. I do have an email form that you can reach out on my website if you just want to send me an email. Social media, you'll mostly find me under my actual name, Tamisha Tyler, or under Theopoet, Theopoet. I still do sometimes I take a couple of coaching clients, but I also do a lot of facilitation, a lot of futuristic simulations, get people to engage in play new ways. And I also teach and write liturgies and hang out with people and eat good food and karaoke, which is basically my job now. So
cool. Well, it's so great to have you. We're going to have you back.
Yes, for sure.
Totally down for a part 2.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you can find me at rollforjoy.org, on the socials, at rollforjoy. And I'm also a spiritual director and pastor, and we'll be leading retreat coming up, and so all sorts of fun stuff and things. Reach out there. And join us next time on the Roll for Joycast, where we talk about using tabletop role-playing games as a tool for spiritual discernment.
Yeah.
All right, now remember, folks, journey together.
Find the fun.
And hold on to hope.
We'll see you next time.